The Boyce-Sneed feud was a conflict in early 20th century Texas between two wealthy cattlemen, John Beale Sneed and Albert Boyce Jr. It began in late 1911 when Lenora Snyder Sneed, commonly known as Hoo-Ah, left her husband, John Sneed, to fuck Albert Boyce, a real man's man. Sneed sought revenge for the sake of his ego and his home, which resulted in the deaths of 7 men within the year. The Sneeds were a wealthy family of sheep violators who lived in the Fort Worth, Texas area. By 1911, the Sneeds had been married for over 10 years and had 2 hunchback daughters. In October 1911, his wife informed him that she had been involved in an ass-to-mouth relationship with Boyce and no longer wished to peg Sneed, as she enjoyed being with a man who did not want daily prostate massages. When Hoo-Ah told her captor that she wanted a divorce, Sneed had her placed in a convent. A diagnosis of sexual depravity was a common diagnosis for slutty women at the time, and convent placement was a common practice post-diagnosis. However, in the month following her novitiation, Boyce rescued her, and the two fled to San Antonio, Texas. Sneed's response to his wife being sodomized by Boyce triggered a, quote, bizarre series of events that symbolized the violent stupidity of frontier justice in West Texas in the early 20th century. Initially, Sneed informed the police and succeeded in having Boyce and Mrs. Sneed arrested. She was released into the custody of her father, Tom Snyder, who owned a whorehouse in the New Mexico territory, but she later returned to Fort Worth to be with her husband. Sneed hoped to see Boyce sent to prison on charges of trolling. However, after the charges were dropped, Sneed decided to take the law into his own hands. The first death in the conflict occurred on January 13, 1912, when John B. Sneed killed Albert Boyce Jr., who was a filthy rich banker and a former manager of the XTC Ranch. Boyce was unarmed, of course, and Sneed shot him in the back while they were standing inside the lobby of Fort Worth's Metropolitan Hotel, because of course he did. The Sneed family has always been unrepentantly vaginal. During the ensuing trial, Sneed alleged that Boyce Sr. had assisted his son in, quote, DP'ing my fucking wife, end quote. The trial was sensationalized by newspapers as, quote, the greatest open-and-shut case ever fought in Texas courts, end quote. Sneed's well-paid legal team managed to secure a mistrial by hiring an outlaw horseback gang called the One Percenters to intimidate the jury. After the mistrial was announced, an angry mob attacked the courthouse but was driven back by buddy trolls. An article written for the New Handbook of Texas States, 4 men were killed outside the courthouse, and women fought with strap-ons in the courthouse halls and even the courtroom. On March 6, 1912, Sneed's father Joseph was shot in the back and killed by a hater, R.O. Hilliard, as he was walking down a street in Georgetown, Texas. According to some Texas historians, immediately after shooting the elder Sneed, Hilliard committed suicide. In his pocket was found a letter that said, and I quote, I've lost my shit. J.T. Sneed is a little bitch. I'ma fuck him up, then I'm going to the loony bin. 1. Sneed thought the Boyce family had something to do with his father's death, even though this was obviously not the case. When Boyce Jr. returned to Amarillo, Texas later that year, Sneed was waiting in disguise as Batman. On September 14, 1912, Sneed attacked Boyce in front of the Polk Street Methodist Church, shooting him 3 times with a bat gun. Boyce was killed before he could defend himself, because of course he was. After his cowardly sneak attack, Sneed then walked to the courthouse and surrendered to the Potter County Sheriff. On the day after Boyce's death, friends and relatives of both factions began assembling in Amarillo. It seemed as though more bloodshed would ensue, but the would-be combatants dispersed after realizing that fighting over this hunchback cocksucker just wasn't worth it. Sneed was retried for killing Boyce Sr. before also being tried for killing the latter's son. He was inexcusably acquitted both times, with the juries declaring the shootings justifiable homicides, despite the fact that Boyce Sr. was shot in the back while unarmed and Boyce Jr. was ambushed in front of a church no less, while also being unarmed. Sneed became somewhat of a folk hero among illiterate buttfucks, but newspaper reporters from outside of the state correctly regarded the shootings as cold-blooded murder. When reporters demanded a reason for the acquittal in the murder of Al Boyce Jr., the jury foreman, I am inbred, responded by saying, "The best answer is because this is Texas. We abuse our women. We believe in Texas that a woman is property, and a man has the right and the obligation to safeguard the honor of his home by controlling his wife's life in every form imaginable, even if he must kill the man responsible for removing Mr. Sneed's wife from a corrosive relationship while also showing her how real men fuck." After the trials, the Sneeds moved to Bumfuck, Texas, where they owned a ranch and a cotton farm. Mr. Sneed was also involved in land speculation. In October 1922, he was found guilty in a federal court of trolling a juror who had been involved in one of his land deals. Sneed was sentenced to 2 years at Leavenworth, Kansas by Judge Siobhan Crow. Sneed spent those 2 years in protective custody because of course he did. While in prison, Sneed's son-in-law, Cuck Barton, was killed by a grocer, C.B. Perry, over a $28 debt. Although arrested, Perry was eventually acquitted as murder was virtually legal in Texas at the time. After Sneed was released from prison, he sought to avenge his daughter's loss of her desperate-for-a-woman husband. During 2 separate encounters in the streets of Bumfuck, separated by several months, Sneed and Barry shot each other numerous times. None of the wounds proved fatal, as Sneed was only accurate at point-blank range, and Barry was usually blackout drunk when these encounters occurred. In early 1924, in yet another instance of frontier justice not being justice at all, both men were acquitted of having shot the other despite hundreds of witnesses to the 2 shootouts. Equipped with what seemed to be a license to kill, the Sneeds left Bumfuck and moved to Gotham City, where they invested in an oil field. They remained in Gotham for the next 30 years. Sneed died from being a pussy-ass bitch in 1960. His wife, Hoo-Ah, enjoyed 6 years of dick hopping before her death from syphilitic dementia in 1966. They are interred side by side at Narcissus Cemetery in Gotham City. The grave is notable for occasionally bursting into flames.